Thank you for the invitation to speak at the occasion of the 25th anniversary. With my contribution, I come back to the title of a European project, the Raphael Project Appel, Actors in Cultural Heritage and the Legislation. Somehow this title of my presentation links to this project. That was the very early point when I get engaged in the work of E.C.C.O. This project had a twofold subject: the existing legislation in cultural heritage and the real interdisciplinary practice in cultural heritage. In the scope of this project, the moderated discussions amongst different experts, repeated subsequently in various seminars at ICROM, gave a deeper insight into the common work and efforts of different actors to preserve or maintain cultural heritage. Conservator-restorers are part of this challenging process. They are acting in a multidisciplinary and even transdisciplinary field in research and practice. They have a special responsibility, as mentioned in the guidelines of the European Confederation of Conservator-restorers Associations. And you see conservator-restorer in the center, very centralized perspective. The fundamental role of the conservator-restorer is the preservation of cultural property for the benefit of present and future generations. The objects to which society attributes a particular artistic, historic, documentary, aesthetic, scientific, spiritual, or religious value are entrusted to the care of the conservator-restorer by the society. The understanding of the conservator-restorer as last and mainly responsible professional who investigates and works directly in relation to the object may result in over-responsibility and exceeding her or his authority. This may lead to comments such as, "The conservator-restorer knows everything and prescribes even the structural engineers how to solve problems in their competence area." But this, if it happens, may also be a response to missing knowledge and special skills of other experts that are required in building conservation, as has been stated, for instance, in this British report about current skills and training needs for the built heritage sector professionals. And this leads us, for the moment, to the necessary competences for the conservator-restorer in building conservation and restoration. Hence, a simplified model for the necessary competences of conservator-restorers is given here. To accomplish projects or complex tasks with the entire team, methodical competences are requested in order to interact with architects and owners on the same level. As manager, the conservator-restorer is responsible for scheduling and executing of bigger building conservation restoration projects. Scientific expertise is required in order to be responsive to problems of conservation of cultural heritage and use of appropriate materials. Conveying ideas and creative concepts for presentation and or integration of the original appearance or part of demands artistic competences, and proficient manual skills are essential for the quality of investigations, for instance, sondages, and quality of practical measures in conservation restoration. A more complex scheme of competences that combines the decision-making process in conservation restoration and the required competences is given in the E.C.C.O study, competences for access to the conservation restoration profession. But I shall not go into deep in this complex study. You have seen it at the entrance. You can, if you have not yet read it, you can take it and get in interaction with the E.C.C.O responsibles for the development and implementation of this competence study. The shift in understanding the role of conservator-restorers as decision makers in a team emphasizes their function as specialists who may initiate and influence an interaction between the involved experts and disciplines. Their competence lies in their knowledge about the object and the formulation of research and practical questions and the use of transdisciplinary methods. And I will come later to this term, transdisciplinarity. Research and practice, which applies to the conservation restoration of cultural heritage, is a transdisciplinary process, and for those working in the field, it's crucial to have the support of scientific technology for the success of conservation projects, as in this case, the investigation of color changes under environmental influence. Interdisciplinary research, and we all know that, is the base for practical projects together with research that produce knowledge that's really needed for conservation and may then made useful via scientific articles up to technical guidelines as the products of the International Association for Science and Technology of Building Maintenance and the Preservation of Monuments. To describe research and practice and conservation restoration as a transdisciplinary process, hence does not mean only interaction of the involved disciplines, but a new quality of integration of basic and applied research. When the very nature of a problem is under dispute, transdisciplinarity can help to determine the most relevant problems and research questions involved. Conservation restoration is a complex field and may be compared with other fields like engineering science, research and influencing ecosystems, and even human health. The transdisciplinary research process is organized in 3 phases that may be passed through several times: identification and structuring of problems, working at and solving or at least mitigating problems, valorization and transdisciplinary integration. In conservation restoration, the first phase of identification and structuring of problems may be interpreted as investigation of fabrics and conditions, search for cases, search for causes, and identification of needs of stakeholders. Involved in this process are natural scientists, engineers, conservator-restorers in exchange with architects, planners, owners, users, and other specialists. The second phase of problem solving includes discussing damage processes and developing conservation concepts in interaction with and relation to building planning. Involved are architects, engineers, conservator-restorers, building archaeologists, special consultants, restorers in the crafts, conservation officers, natural scientists, and other professionals. The example of the decision-making process will be presented here in the project for the new parliament building at Potsdam, Germany, and it illustrates this methodical approach and some of the problems in discussion. The new parliament building of Potsdam is remembering with its facades from the outside the old stone palace built by Georg Wenceslaus von Knobelsdorff for the Prussian Emperor Federico II, called the Great, in 1751. The building was damaged by fire during the Second World War and completely destroyed by the Communist Party or by the government reigned by the Communist Party in 1960 against the protest of architects, conservators, and interested citizens in the former German Democratic Republic and abroad. So, the reference to this building in the project of the new parliament was an expression of the political and emotional wish to get back the appearance of the historical center of the town Potsdam. One of the main challenges was the use of facade elements of the old palace of Potsdam as spolies with the intention to reawaken the historic appearance for the new building. Conflicts arose from the application of building norms for energy efficiency that are obligatory for new buildings like this one. Hence, the original elements had to be cut in depth. This relates to the third phase of transdisciplinary methodical approach, the discussion about values of cultural heritage, in this case, the integrity of the original elements of the old palace, is an example for valorization and transdisciplinary integration. Following the European standard glossary of general terms used in cultural heritage, the whole spectrum of activities aiming for safeguarding cultural heritage is defined as conservation. For the purpose of my presentation, I used the concept of built heritage management in order to distinguish between conservation restoration activities and others like repair, reconstruction, and recreation. My focus here lies on conservation restoration activities embedded in broader projects of built heritage management. Legal frameworks at European, national, and regional levels have an impact on professional practice in building conservation. This simple scheme shall explain the process of formalization in the different steps of regulation and vice versa, the binding force of the produced documents. It means coming from the state of the art, the best practice, it develops and gets more formalized through guidelines, standards, regulations up to legislations. And vice versa, the degree of commitment diminishes from legislation through regulations, standards, guidelines, up to the examples of best practice. Coming to legislation, Germany is divided into 16 federal states with respective 16 ministries of culture, 16 slightly different systems of laws and regulations for protection and care of cultural heritage, including state monument protection acts. Systems of quality assurance may therefore vary from region to region. The authority's task of maintenance of cultural heritage is fulfilled in general by two institutions, whereas the state authorities for protection of monuments work as local authorities. The state authorities for preservation of monuments or state conservation offices are acting for the federal states and nationwide through the Association of State Conservators in the Federal Republic of Germany under the awning of the Conference of German Ministers for Culture. The Association of State Conservators, here in this German translation, Vereinigung der Landesdenkmalpfleger in der Bundesrepublik Deutschland, addresses topics that transcend the boundaries of the federal states. Since the 1980s, standards and guidelines for investigation, management of cultural heritage and documentation exist on different levels. Standards for examination and documentation in conservation and building archaeology, for conservation of special groups of objects, for maintenance and care of movable cultural heritage, and for other fields. There exist as guidelines and expert recommendations from the Association of State Conservators, as standard from the German Association of Engineers, and as regulations from the authorities of various federal states. Standards as for energy efficiency in historic buildings are commented and implemented with the involved experts and authorities on national levels. Some of them are in revision process at the moment. For instance, the standard about examination and treatment of materials that will be called as revised standard Cultural Heritage, Examination, Conservation and Impact of Environment, issued by the German Association of Engineers. All European standards issued by the CEN Technical Working Group are also actively developed with involvement of German experts and simultaneously translated, so they get a status of German standards DIN EN. European, national and regional regulations prescribe, for instance, public contracts and award procedures in projects that receive public funding. Beyond that, there's still some flexibility to adapt award procedures with regard to projects, non-exhaustive descriptions, or the specific requirements of the work. The complexity of conservation restoration work often requires elaborating and specifying a concept while working. Under such circumstances, it becomes possible to operate under the liberal profession regulations and to apply the procedure for competitive dialogue. It's also important to adapt conservation restoration specialists' planning in the process of building planning. In Germany, professional practice of architects and engineers is described by 9 service rendering phases in accordance with the fee structure for architects and engineers. And important is for the implementation of this procedure in conservation restoration projects that the quality of the interventions and the long-term preservation of cultural heritage is guaranteed by the involvement of conservation restoration experts and specialist planning. And here I present a proposal that describes the involvement of experts in this structure of the building planning. Effective working processes on convincing results in building conservation may be achieved only through good collaboration and high quality of the work delivered by different contributors. This requires knowledge about competence of the involved actors and the decision-making process. And you see here the involvement of the conservator-restorer planners according to a well-established structure in the building planning and managing that gives a proposal how to include the development of conservation restoration concepts into the project formulation and to make it boundary for both sides, the owner, the planner, and the implementation of these plans. For the new museum project at Berlin, Germany, this conservation restoration expert planning was a really important and extensive preparation process. And the more then in the management, the competitive dialogue tendering has been applied for a wide range of conservation measures. The new museum, you see here at the edge, has been designed by Friedrich August Stüler. So you have seen it yesterday. The building suffered severe damage during World War II, and emergency measures to preserve the structure and decorations were only taken in the 80s. The key architectural aim of the project was to reinstate the original volumes and to conserve the parts remaining after the war. The building's facade and interiors were carefully preserved. The scars of the war were not patched over, but rather incorporated into the conservation and restoration of the landmarked building. The intended results were achieved through progressive development and differentiation of the concept by the involved teams of conservator-restorers, together with craftsmen applying technical tests and work examples, compared to the tests of structural engineering in the same building. The whole process of built heritage management is organized through paths of decisions and consequences for subsequent actions. Developing concepts and realizing projects with intervention in built heritage hence requires a well-defined procedure and a framework of professional involvement. The implementation of these procedure and conservation restoration projects guarantees the quality of the interventions and the long-term preservation of cultural heritage if competence and quality requirements are followed and the allocation of specific budgets is provided. Effective working process and convincing results may be achieved only by high quality of the work. Improving knowledge about the required competences and skills of all responsible actors in architectural conservation has to be an integral part of the education of decision makers. And you see here a scheme of actors and competences in building conservation in Germany that is a proposal to describe the involvement of different professions in the different phases of built heritage conservation and management projects, with special focus on conservation restoration in this case. And this is a scheme that is under discussion recently in Germany with the different involved parties. Coming to quality assurance, I want to conclude my presentation that quality assurance or quality management of a project starts with the first decisions about its shape, the setup of an interdisciplinary project leading team, including or sometimes even led by conservator-restorers. And it continues with drawing up specifications or concepts for these projects, and these have to be measured against the implementation of these projects have to be measured against the first concept and investigations. There is considerable room for improvement because building professionals often don't consult conservation specialists during this step of project development. The selection of qualified professionals or firms requires procedures that measure personal competences instead of just asking for examples of comparable projects. There are gaps in the existing quality assurance system. Effective instruments for the control and improvement of a basic level of quality of projects and concepts are the listed building consents if they are combined with the offer of dialogue and expert advice provided by the state offices of building preservation and care or state conservation centers. Problems may occur if in the control of long-lasting and complex projects where the listed building consent does not specify a procedure of quality assurance in the project management. It depends from decisions of the experts at the state authorities how deeply they get involved with special projects. Therefore, the level of control may vary from case to case. Heritage institutions play an important role for quality control. Shortening of public resources result in restructuring and loss of qualified experts in the institutions. This may also affect the quality control. Reducing public resources results in restructuring and redundancy. Public authorities should take into account that safeguarding cultural heritage needs scientific and technological research to develop and support key technologies in the conservation sector. Improving knowledge about the required competences and skills of all responsible actors in architectural conservation should be an integral part of the education of decision makers. Conservators-restorers play an integral part in architectural conservation from the outline of a project until aftercare service. Both in institutions and as freelancers, they work together with other professions and share responsibility for the built heritage. Thank you.